I'm John Merrow, a retired education correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Recently written a book called Addicted to Reform, a 12-step program to rescue public education. I used that example for a good reason. I think for the last at least 20 years, perhaps even longer, we have become addicted to superficial reforms of public education, which seem to change things, make us feel good for a while, but don't change the fundamental structure of public education, which needs to change. Right now we have a sorting system. The school looks at each kid and says, how smart is that kid? How smart is that kid? And they'll use test scores, but they also, of course, use class and race and social status and so on. And they sort kids. Essentially, these are winners, these are not winners. We cannot afford that. It's not ethical, not moral, it's not economically practical. We need schools that look at each kid and say, how is this child smart? How is this child intelligent? And then build on those strengths so that each kid reaches the maximum his or her potential. So one of the first steps is to admit that we're addicted to these superficial reforms. Now people have said we've got 12 steps. Which are the most important ones? Well, first one, the most important, after admitting the addiction, is to ask the right question. How is this child intelligent? Not how intelligent is this child? The second one you have to do as a community is you have to measure what you value. You have to say, what do we care about? What do we want our kids to be able to do when they are adults? Do we want them to be able to fill in bubbles? Well, then they can keep on doing what they're doing in school now. On the other hand, if we want them to be productive citizens, good citizens who vote, participate, family, et cetera, then they have to do a lot of different things in school. So we have to say, well, let's measure what we value instead of valuing what we measure. What do we value? Do you care that your kids have physical activity recess? Well, then have the schools report how much recess there is each week. Educators are pretty smart. If you tell them we want to know how many hours of recess per week, they're going to know that a big number is better than a little number. If you value art and music and the creative aspect of humanity, then let's measure that as well. So if you ask that question, how many hours of art do kids have every week? Educators are smart. They're going to figure out that a low number is not good, a high number is pretty good. Do you care about teacher turnover? Well, if in your school 30% of the teachers leave every year, that's chaos. So let's measure teacher turnover. Now, you're not doing it for gotcha. If it turns out that the school has a 30% turnover, let's go find out why. Not go fire people, just go find out why. Do you care about attendance? You should. Well, let's measure pupil attendance and teacher attendance. Schools need to know that these things matter, and then they will measure them. And by the way, notice that I'm using the school as the unit of measure, not the kid. The first thing we should be looking at is the school. Because if everyone in that school knows they're being measured, then everyone is going to have a stake in it, and a rising tide will lift all boats. Right now, we have reduced it, so we're essentially measuring English and math. Well, how do you rate the science teacher? Believe it or not, there are school districts that use the English teacher scores to rate the science teacher. It makes no sense at all. We do not need to test every kid every year in every subject. Here's the analogy. When you go to the doctor for your physical exam, they test your blood, right? They take a little sample. They don't drain all your blood and test all of it. You can do the same thing in schools. You can test a stratified, well-drawn sample of kids and get a true reading on how the school is doing in terms of math, English, and all the other subjects. Now, of course, every kid should be assessed. Assessed to improve, not test to punish. So that's the second critical step. I've written about 12 of them, and I hope you take a look at the book, Addicted to Reform. But we have to ask the right question. How are you intelligent, not how smart are you? And we have to measure what we value. We have to decide what it is we care about in education, and then build schools that way. So we build on a health model, build on the strengths of kids, and on all kids, not just some kids. Thanks very much.